Hello and welcome back for another episode of Financial Freedom by 40. I'm Kelly and this is Ryan, and in this episode we wanted to do a bit of a bonus episode because we know that a lot of you are really curious about what it costs to travel Australia. So we've been promising since before we left New Zealand that we were going to do a video about our budget, and we're now about 4 months into our trip. So we've done a bit of analysis of the first 3 months of our travels, and we thought that we would do a bit of a run through of that with you, and also do a bit of a breakdown of our overall budget that we did at the start of the trip. And we'll if we've got time in this episode, we'll do a run through of sort of how we're going against that budget. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah. The costs after about 3 months, I think, would be a good starting point, and then we can just update our followers month on month after that, and maybe do something at a later date, or run a summary of how it all went.
Yeah, so I think we'll probably do a month by month reel or something like that to keep you updated. So basically, if anybody else who is following along wants to do something like this, then you can have a bit of an idea about what it costs for a family of 4 to travel Australia, and doing a big lap in a caravan. So what we're going to do, we've got some notes, and I'll keep referring back, and Ryan's got his notes too, and we'll also overlay some of the numbers over the screen so that you can see those on the screen as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
I'll add that in afterwards so you can see sort of what we're talking about as well. So Ryan's basically been in charge of managing the budget, and he's the spreadsheet guru in our house. It'd be a disaster if that was left up to me, I think, because I don't know Excel at all. So Ryan's got some nifty spreadsheets, and we might at some point share sort of a template or something that you can use as well if we get around. No promises, but we might get around to creating something like that for you as well. So do you want to give us a bit of a run through on how you came up with the budget and how you set it all up?
Yeah. So let's cover the budget side of things first, and obviously we put this budget together before we left New Zealand and before we even knew what we were going to be into as part of it. So I think firstly let's split the budget into a couple of key elements maybe. So we then looked, I guess, initially at our income streams that we would get, and also then what our expenses would be both at home in New Zealand, because there are certain things that we couldn't put on hold, right? We still have a house over there, and we still have holding costs as such at home.
Yeah, we've still got a cat.
yeah, still got animals. So there's certain expenses that we had to take into account that were both in New Zealand, but then also there were expenses that were specifically related to this trip in Australia. So I guess around the income stream side of things, and that'll be different to a lot of people that are listening as well, right?
Yeah.
Income, I mean, that's going to vary for everybody. You could have a job that you're still working on the road, you've got an income on the road. You could be renting houses out, like we are, we're Airbnb our own home, so there's an income stream. And there's obviously any other income sources, such as, cash in the bank, or if you sell any investments or sell any cars or assets before you leave. So I think that'll be quite different for a lot of our followers. So I'm not going to really cover off the income streams because everybody can do their own calculations on the income, I think.
Yeah, and we'll do I know a lot of people are interested in how the Airbnb is going as well. And I think we're sort of on reflection, we were going to keep everybody updated on that. But I think in the end, it's probably going to be better for us to do a summary of that at the end once we've finished the trip, and then we will have had a whole year's worth of Airbnb, so we can do a real breakdown as to, whether that was a good choice or a bad choice, or just how we feel about it overall at the end. I mean, so far it seems to be going pretty well, but we'll do a separate video on that, I think, when we get back to New Zealand, about how that all goes.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, so do you want to go through this budget?
So the expense side. So I mean, like I said, there's the holding costs or expenses back in New Zealand, and once again, everybody's situation is going to be different. So I think let's park our expenses in New Zealand and let's just focus on the trip in Australia, because I think that's what's going to be relevant to our followers. So our expenses then in Australia. So a couple of parts to this. Firstly, probably the most significant cost of all of it was the purchasing of our tow vehicle and the purchasing of a caravan.
Yeah.
Now,
Combined.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a lot of discussion whether we rent something, whether we buy second hand, or whether we buy brand new, etc. And so I guess that'll be quite similar to our followers as well, will be, well, what do they want to do? And these two items you can research fairly easily based around what you want and get an estimate of a cost, right? So for us, in combination, I estimated those two pieces for us to be at about 220,000 Australian dollars. Put that aside, that'll cover off our tow vehicle, it'll also cover off our caravan.
And for us, we decided we wanted to buy a new caravan, and we might do a Q&A in a separate session. There's just so many things you could run through in this video, but we would go on forever if we ran through all of these things. So we might put out a sort of call for questions maybe after we've released this video, so that if anyone has any questions about things like why we chose a new caravan, why we bought a second-hand car, those kind of things, that we can run through those in a whole other separate video, because this would go on for hours if we just
talk.
Yeah,
so 220,000. Now, obviously, that was to purchase them, and our plan is to sell them again at the end of the trip. So I guess the cost for us is only going to be the difference between those two. And we don't really know what the market's going to be to sell them at the end. So I guess there's kind of a little bit of an unknown there. And so we've got a bit of a ballpark figure, but we'll only really know the cost of that, or the true cost of that, at the end of the trip. So 220,000 was the upfront capital that we needed just to buy the tow vehicle and the caravan.
And that will, there's so many variables as to what that could come out with, because we've seen people buying anything from like a $40,000 caravan and a much cheaper tow vehicle to people spending like $400,000 or whatever. So it's so variable depending on what your personal needs are.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, and then the next piece were there's a couple of one-off expenses that we would have up front. So other than the capital itself, depending around what vehicle is and what condition it's in and has it been set up, there's a setup cost for us. So put our setup cost together. To be honest, didn't really know what our setup cost would be initially, because we didn't know what vehicle we would have and what state they would be in. We did have
an idea of the amount of money we wanted to spend. Like, we had an overall budget, like Ryan said, of around that 220,000. So we knew up front that we didn't want to spend more than that on the...
Well, that was initial outlay, right?
Combination, yeah.
Yeah, initial outlay. And then, so the caravan itself, we knew it was brand new. It came with nothing in it. So we kind of had to estimate that, what do you need to get plates and cutlery and all the rest of it and fit the caravan out.
Yeah.
And then also we knew that the vehicle would require some form of setup costs, given we're going to be on the road for 12 months. So I just estimated a round figure of about $10,000 that we put aside, and that was going to be the setup cost. And we would need that right up front to set ourselves to get on the road once we had picked up our tow vehicle and caravan. So
that was for both. The $10,000 budget was for setting up the caravan and the car.
Yep, correct. Yeah, in total. Then the other upfront cost that we knew we were going to be in for was going to be insurance. Right?
Yeah.
So we had to have insurance for the caravan. We also had to have insurance for the tow vehicle itself. And then there's obviously the other insurance items for us while we're on the road and while you're traveling in another country, right? So we have travel insurance rather than any other medical kind of insurance as part of that. So
So one of the things we could do was we have an insurance broker, and the recommendation was to pause our health insurance policies back at home. We have health insurance for all four of us at home, and we paused that for a year and took out a full travel insurance policy for a year. And it's quite pricey I can't remember the exact cost of the travel insurance policy. It was a couple of $1,000s anyway for a whole year policy, but the cost was offset by what we would have been paying at home for our health insurances at home.
So I budgeted about $4,300, I think it was, for travel insurance at that point in time. That was just travel insurance. And then I went online and I just got quotes for roughly the vehicle we knew what we'd be looking for. So I just went online and got some quotes and some estimates. And likewise for the caravan, I just looked at what sort of caravan insurance we could get as well. So got pretty close to a few of those items in terms of getting quotes for them for the insurance. So Then we get into, I guess, the main categories, and these are now the ongoing expenses that we would have once we're up and running and on the road. So, firstly, created a accommodation sort of expense and broke this down into some subcategories. So, there's probably three different types of accommodation that we would be in for. Firstly, would be caravan parks as part of that. Secondly, would be national parks. I mean, they're a significant part of the accommodation that's on the road when you're travelling around Australia. And then thirdly, we heard lots about free camps and overnight RV parks. So I put a category in there for free camps. So for that, we just went through and we said, well, roughly what would we look to do in a month? And so plan for about 14 days in a month would be free camping. Plan for about 10 days in a caravan park, and then about 6 days on average in a national park. So
and the costings for those, we went off Wikicamps. So we use Wikicamps to look for a lot of the camps that we stay at. And so we sort of went around and had a look at different campsites, whether it be national parks ones, whether it be some of the other ones we've stayed at as well, sort of as an alternative to caravan parks, have been farm stay type properties. So we kind of had a look at what the average was for the types of properties we thought we'd stay at, and we worked out roughly what a daily rate would be for a caravan park, what a daily rate would be for a national park, and then obviously free camps are free. So
yeah, correct. And obviously that's an average, right? That's an average per month. And so we just kind of said annually for accommodation, we would spend $11,160 in total. And how that played out across the year was a bit of an unknown. Like we couldn't plan exactly, but we knew in total that's about an average of $930 a month. And so I mean, now that we've been on the road for 4 months and we're going to talk to the 3-month budget, we'll dive into a little bit more about how that has actually eventuated, and the timing. So that's the accommodation, I guess, categories and subcategories. The next one outside of accommodation is food for us.
Yeah.
So I broke that once again into a couple of subcategories under food. So firstly, I looked at groceries, and so that's just what you'd normally get at the supermarket for your kind of weekly grocery bill. Alcohol was a separate subcategory, and obviously in Australia they're actually sold in a separate place, so probably a lot easier to budget separately in that. And then lastly was a takeaway category for eating out and the like. So for our groceries, we just went roughly off what we would spend in New Zealand for that. And
well, roughly, but we thought, because we'd heard so much about how it's so much cheaper to buy groceries in Australia, that we discounted our costs a bit from what
Correct.
we spend at home. And we'll talk a bit shortly about how that actually has panned out. But yeah, so we planned about $300 a week for groceries, about $50 a week for alcohol, and about $80 a week for takeaways is the kind of amount we put for the subcategories. So in total, about $430 a week for those three, or $22,360 in total for the whole year. The next category or expense then, and this was going to be probably one of the biggest for us, was going to be fuel. And so like Kelly mentioned, we used Wikicamps was the app that we used, and Wikicamps has the ability to put in a trip planner. And so we planned roughly where we would be in Australia at what point in time. We kind of put a rough outline in that, and we loaded the travel or the trip planner in Wikicamps. And it makes it like a route. Like, so if you load it all on Wikicamps, if you zoom out and see, you can see Australia as a whole, and you can see roughly, like, if you're going to stay at this camp and visit all these different sites, what your route will be around Australia and how many kilometres that's going to work out to be.
Correct. Yeah, the trip planner then spits out a total kilometres at the end, and so we estimate about 45,000 kilometres is what we would do in the 12 months in total. Then I just googled around, so we knew we were going to be out for a Land Cruiser, either a 200 series or a 79 series Land Cruiser. They are a V8 diesel V8, and so I googled around and looked at many other families that are doing, towing the caravans and stuff, and got an average kind of litres per 100 kilometres just by Googling that. And then I just Googled as well what the average diesel price is in Australia, and put those in to my spreadsheet, and then I added a bit of a surcharge as such for remote areas on top of that. So we heard that the more remote you get, obviously diesel starts to increase in costs, and so I loaded a surcharge on top of that, and basically came out to about $23,500 for diesel, and I guess the key piece for the diesel is it depends on how much travelling you're going to be doing week to week or month to month, right? Will depend around how that expense is actually going to play out across the 12 months.
Yeah, and also like it depends, like, it depends on your life, depends how fast you're travelling, what route you're taking.
Yeah.
And it's going to again vary from family to family, but
Absolutely.
you can use those numbers to sort of work out your own calculation. And I mean, we're travelling pretty fast to get the whole way around Australia in 12 months. Like if you were doing a slower lap,
absolutely,
that would be stretched out over a longer period of time. So
so fuel was definitely going to be one of our big expense items here. The next then was around servicing, repairs and breakdowns for the vehicles, caravans, etc. So based on the Land Cruiser itself, I knew roughly what the servicing schedule would be for those, done every 5,000 or 10,000 Ks. I basically went online to the likes of Supercheap. I estimated, well, this is what you would need for a service for that, and loaded in, I guess, a service amount for the tow vehicle. Very similarly, I did the same for the caravan. And I guess because ours was new, it was going to have to go back to the manufacturer, an authorised dealer, and they were a set cost, and they had to happen at certain intervals. So that part was probably a little bit easier to budget.
I think also we should say,
those.
With the car too, like Ryan's an engineer and he's pretty handy, so we're talking about servicing the car ourselves. Like we're doing, at the moment, this is all just regular maintenance that we're doing ourselves. Like the cost would be significantly higher if you had to take your car to Toyota or a service service centre.
Correct.
Every time you had to get your servicing done, it would be costing a lot more than what we've budgeted. So
absolutely. Yeah, so just the standard oil service, I estimated about $350, and then the bigger services, I put in at about $500 for that, and that included the ability of doing filters, oils, you name it, on top of it. So for the car then, servicing annually was $2,550, and for the caravan was $3,240.
And those are the services that we just have to get done as part of our warranty. So we have to get the caravan service through a approved agent. So
correct. I wasn't going to do the caravan ourselves to keep the warranty, so that had to go to a dealer. So, and then on top of that, I just estimated basically a contingency for any breakdowns and repairs. It was likely that something was going to go wrong at some stage along the road with the amount of Ks that we're doing. So I put another $2,500 there as a bit of a guess for just a contingency budget for breakdowns and repairs.
Yeah.
All right. So those, I guess, are the main or the larger costs that are ongoing. There's obviously other costs associated with being on the road. One of those is utilities. So, I mean, we've got phones. We also plan like gas, car washes, those sorts of things. So they all fall under the utility bucket. So I estimated about $2,125 for those. I just said roughly we're going to clean the car once a month. This is what you'd expect to pay at a kind of a car wash place. Went online to the relevant mobile phone suppliers here and looked at what the plans would be to come up with the phone costs. And then gas, I just sort of said how many 9kg bottles would you go through, and then once again, what's sort of the price. And to be honest, a lot of this is just an estimate, a bit of a guess, but it's, I guess that's a budget and it's just a place to start, right? And then you can refine as you go.
Yeah, and we kind of used a little bit of as a guideline, sort of what we do at home as well, like
as a starting point.
Yeah.
The other one there was education. So we're homeschooling Oliver and Xavier on the road as we go. I guess the benefit of that was we bought a whole lot of the education stuff with us from home.
Yeah.
Either stuff that they had remaining from school last year or education books, papers, etc. that we had anyway.
Yeah.
So there wasn't a large cost up front there.
Yeah.
But there were going to be things that cropped up on the road as you went. So I put about another $480 aside specifically for education costs as we go. The next one then was medical. So yes, we've got travel insurance, but that's kind of for emergency situations.
Yeah, or just like doctor's visits, like if you
Correct.
get, tummy bug or
Yeah,
flu
or dentists
something.
or
Yeah.
pharmacy for
Yeah,
medication
yeah,
or anything
yeah.
like that. So I put about $1,200 aside for medical bills, or anything that's going to kind of crop up as part of that. Now, personal spending was another category that we put. So this was so we have a category for the boys for their spending and then a category for us as well. This was just an amount that was put by the side effectively every single week that allowed us just the ability to spend on things that we wanted to do that were outside the budget or kind of non-defined.
But also things like your day-to-day things that you need, like the boys will no doubt need new shoes at some point. They're growing so fast, like their wetsuits won't fit them the whole for the whole trip. Like clothes, just
Correct.
like little bits and
haircuts,
pieces.
all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's about $10,400 I put together with that, and I used our home sort of spending as a bit of a guideline for that as well to give us a bit of an estimate. The next one then was attractions. So these were just basically amount that we would spend on the road as we went. I put $4,200 per annum for attractions. Now, this did not include one-off experiences that we knew we wanted to do, right? So they were another category in addition to that. So we know that we wanted to do the whale shark dive or Fningaloo. So you could once again go online and get a budget or get a quote for that or see what the price is.
Yeah.
So I included also the whale shark dive on top of that, which is another $1,600.
Yeah.
And then I kind of put aside another $2,000 in that for another experience that we would probably want at some point. So
the attractions one though, just to come back to that, so we've got $4,000 over the whole year budgeted, but that's kind of like, it doesn't sound like a lot, but that's just to pay like little bits and pieces. So it's things like we might go to this odd museum here, or maybe go do a round of mini golf or something like that. So they're not necessarily huge amounts of money, but we've got an amount each week. And I guess the idea is too that some weeks we will go through where we might do nothing. Like we might have a week at the beach where all we're doing is swimming and snorkeling, and it actually doesn't cost us anything. It's already covered by our camping fees.
Yeah.
And so there might be other weeks where we do something that's much more expensive, and that covers that. Or like we bought a museum pass that does multiple museums. And so that was like a big one-off thing, but that's covered us for lots of different places that we've visited, so we don't have to pay down the track.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I guess those those buckets that are covered before, so utilities, education, medical, personal spending, attractions, and then any one-off expenses, I put about $20,000 aside for that, and no doubt you'll cover off each of those items anyway that I've just been through across the screen. So so those were all of our main costs, and obviously as part of that some costs increase from the time that we've done the budget to when we're actually on the road, and so I put a contingency of 10% on top of that as well.
Also something we haven't talked about, so I just check with you, the numbers that you're running here, these are Australian dollars, aren't they?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, not New Zealand dollars. So
yes.
This would be, obviously it's more expensive for us paying in New Zealand dollars, so we are paying in New Zealand dollars, so we have to sort of do a currency conversion if you wanted to get it to, back to New Zealand dollars. But we've run it in Australian dollars because we figured this could be relevant to you, not just if you're coming from New Zealand, but maybe if you're coming from the UK or from the States or something like that, and then you can just work out, translate the numbers to your own currency.
Do the currency change.
Yeah.
I guess when we add all those expenses up, there was about 112,000 Australian dollars. So 12 months around to trip around Australia, $112,000. Now that excludes the cost of the vehicle and the cost of the caravan. So once we sell it, We will then obviously establish what the cost is of the caravan and the cost of the vehicle, and
Yeah.
that will go
Yeah.
on top of that $112,000.
And we'll do another video at the end, probably when we get back to New Zealand and we've sort of had a bit of chance to really crunch the final numbers.
Yeah.
I think it'd be useful to do a breakdown, once we get back and show people finally, like at the end of the year, what the
actually
actuals
cost.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Sounds good. The other piece is, I guess, that's the trip around Australia, right? And so, like I mentioned at the start, any income streams that you do have versus the expenses that we've got at home, if there's still a surplus income as well on top of that, then that would obviously offset the cost. So, 112,000 Australian dollars isn't necessarily $112,000 net at the end that it's actually going to physically cost us. But that's obviously for anybody to add.
What we're paying out every week. This
Correct.
is, is what it all adds up to at the end. So, okay, so then should we do? If you've finished off with what we thought it was going to cost, should we run through what it's actually cost us for the first 3 months?
Yeah, see how good my budget was, right? But it's only 3 months, so I've got a bit of time to make up.
And that's what we should say too. Like so there's some things about this which we'll run through as we go through it. Like some of the costs are more expensive in some parts of the country than others. Some things, like some places, there's more free camping than there is in others. So there's a lot of variables depending on where you start your lap. So we started our lap in Brisbane on the East Coast. And so we'll see this when we come through our accommodation costs, but it's a lot more expensive for accommodation on the East Coast and much fewer free camps than there are in some other parts of Australia. So where you start your lap affects what your budget will look like at any particular point in time. So for us, that's why it's going to be so important to come back later and tell you what it looks like after a whole year, because the 3 months might not be an accurate representation of what, you can't just go 3 times 4 and make it a whole year.
Yeah, correct.
Because it'll be different depending on what part of the country you're travelling through at any particular point in time.
Yeah, I think that was, now that we've been on the road for a bit of time, I think that was one of the big pieces that would have been helpful in the budget, would have been to try and do some form of timing on the costs. Because like you mentioned, coming down the East Coast, high population cities, pretty expensive. And on top of that, we had the summer school holidays and the summer holiday period that we're on the East Coast for. And that's the largest holiday time frame and typically the most expensive as well.
For caravan parks particularly. So, and accommodation is harder to get, so you have more limited choices, so less availability at some of the cheaper camps. So I mean it's all been a learning curve, the whole thing, as we've been going. So let's run through it anyway, and we can break down some of those things as we go.
All right. So for the first 3 months, basically as part of it. So I mentioned in the budget the setup costs. So I put $10,000 aside for that. 3 months we had spent basically $11,500 for setup costs as part of it. This was slightly more than we obviously anticipated, and it probably in hindsight could have been a lot more. The vehicle that we ended up purchasing had already been set up by the previous owner to tow a caravan. It had already got solar, it had fridge in it, it had all the setup, the winch, basically the 4-wheel drive, the roof racks, everything on it. So that saved a huge amount of setup costs, although it was probably reflected in the sale price as well. So once again, it's one of those pieces where it depends what you want, it depends what you're going to buy, and what you can find as well on the market. So so just over $11,500. The other piece in the setup costs is we plan to put on a boat, right? Initially. Unfortunately, our weights and what we got didn't allow that to happen, and so I guess a portion of that budget I put aside for the boat, but we actually ended up spending that on the setup costs for the caravan and the car.
So if we had had a boat, it probably would have been another $5,000 ish for the cost of that.
Correct.
So so the setup costs, that was just all of the stuff that we put into the caravan. So that was like the
chairs,
linens,
picnic tables, barbecue, all of that type of thing. So I guess that's the downside about coming from overseas is
Yeah.
you can only
Yeah.
bring so much
Yeah.
with you, and so everything else you have to purchase here.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that stuff we obviously shopped around and try to purchase.
Yeah.
There's also the ability, if you've got more time, is to try and buy some of that stuff secondhand.
Yeah.
Which obviously we tried to do where we could, but yeah, there's only so much time you've actually got to set yourself up.
So the setup costs then, so they're obviously one-off.
Correct.
So that they're not going to be ongoing.
Yeah, so when I spoke about our budget, I had the upfront capital costs was obviously to buy the caravan and the tow vehicle itself. Those two expenses are not in our 3-month budget.
Yeah.
Or actuals rather, sorry. The setup costs are in our first 3 months because we actually had to pay that capital, but they're not an ongoing cost. So later on when I talk about what's our weekly ongoing cost, it does not include the setup cost because that's already paid for and that should pay for the 3 months.
Okay, cool.
The next one then, was insurance and registrations. For the caravan itself, we obviously ended up going with Jayco itself. Looked at many other caravan suppliers for insurance on that, and looked at primarily what their contents cover was probably the big decision maker for that. And so we ended up going with Jayco because they covered a large contents as part of it, and that was an annual cost of $2,160. Now, one of the pieces with insurance was you obviously get a discount if you pay for it annually up front to start with versus paying it month by month as you go. So for a few of these, or the majority of the insurances and registration, I paid up front for the 12 months. So so that was, I guess, a larger upfront cost, but doesn't end up becoming an ongoing expense.
Yeah.
So caravan insurance, $2,160 is what it's cost us, and that's for the 12 months. The next was then the car insurance. So this was one of the ones where just decided to pay it month by month as part of that. So $230 is what we pay monthly for the car insurance for it, and that was comprehensive insurance cover with also the added glass protection on top of it, which has paid off just over the 3 months though, so we won't actually cover that in this one.
No, it didn't cost us anything though. That was the joy of the glass cover. So
correct.
Get the glass cover.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so many gravel roads. There's mining, all sorts. Glass cover happens. Glass chips happens in the city.
Yeah.
It was likely to happen on the road in Australia.
Yeah.
So definitely had the glass cover added. And then the other piece to consider was your car insurance does include roadside assistance. Well, at least our policy didn't. I think there are some that do. So had to also get roadside assistance. And then medical insurance. So I covered this off just before. We obviously managed to get our travel insurance down to just over $2,000. So that was actually quite a large saving compared to what we budgeted. So $2,044 was for the 12 months, and that was for our travel insurance for that, which was it was a good outcome. So that leaves then registration costs. So the caravan itself, when you purchase that, includes 12 months of registration as well. So there was no upfront cost, but we're going to have to pay, because we bought it well before we actually left, we're going to have to pay registration on top. So that's a cost that hasn't come yet, but will come later on in the trip for it. And then there's also the registration for the car, which is for 12 months, which was $1,283 for the 12 months we spent on the car itself for registration there. So that's all for the registration side of it. The next one then is accommodation. So we obviously took that budget and we just spread it evenly for 12 months. I think, like you mentioned before, traveling down the east coast is going to be a lot more expensive to some of the remote parts where you can do free camps or national parks. So we probably expected the budget to be over for accommodation, at least initially, and then we would catch it up at the back end as we start going west and start going remote in Western Australia.
Yeah.
So accommodation so far we've spent $3,700 in total.
How is that as a proportion of the overall?
So 3,700, and we planned for accommodation to spend 11,160.
So it's about a third we've spent already.
Correct.
And we are, for 3 months.
Yeah, and we're
It's
about
not quite a
a
third.
quarter of
Yeah.
the way.
Yeah.
A quarter of the way through.
Yeah.
So, so accommodation. But we knew that, right? Because as you start going remote, you get more free camps, but you also get more national parks availability. So, and they're a bit cheaper.
And I think also what we were going to mention here as well with the accommodation was that we did expect, even coming down the East Coast, that there would be more free camps available, like at least some free camps. And we probably found a couple, maybe. Very few coming down the East Coast. So between Brisbane and Melbourne, we might have stayed in one free camp. And so we did stay at some parks camps, we stayed at some council ones. We did find some alternative camps, so we've now got a category of like other
Correct.
in what we're doing now. Because we've found that there's a lot of places like sports clubs or recreation centres where you can camp for cheaper than a caravan park. So it might be like $30 a night versus like $60 to like $120 a night, depending on what time it is and where it is for the caravan park. So we have found some, that are cheaper, but way less free camps than we thought. And even now, after the, 3 months, like we still have not found that many free camps. And we heard heaps of people talking about how there's heaps of free camps. We know that part of that is because we've chosen to follow the coast.
Yeah.
Like we've heard people saying there's a lot more free camps if you head inland.
Further inland.
But, a lot of the sites we wanted to see were along the coast, and so that has meant that our accommodation has been a bit more as well than what we were initially expecting. And while we are finding that now that we're more west, there are more cheaper and free camps. I guess, like, again, it's something we'll cover off like later down the track of where we land in the end, overall, because definitely from what we'd sort of seen online and with YouTubers and Instagram and that, we had expected a lot more free camps to be available, but heaps of them have unfortunately been closed down or are not legit, or cost, or you have to pay for. So some of the ones that were free on our original plan are now like maybe not a lot, but like maybe $20 a night. So it's just a lot.
Still adds up.
Yeah. So the other thing too, just with the accommodation, is that some of the places, like, it will vary depending on what your setup is as to where you can stay. Like quite a few of the free camps that we've stayed at, you've had to be fully self-contained, so you have to have your own grey water built into your caravan, like grey water capture built into the caravan. You have to have your own toilet. So that limits the free camps you can stay at too. Like
not reliant on power, etc.
Yeah, exactly. So like we've got a bunch of solar panels on the roof and batteries and everything, so we can actually stay at off-grid camps where we don't have to be plugged into power. We don't need to have a generator or anything like that running. Like some camps you aren't allowed to have a generator running it, and we've noticed some people need to have generators to be able to power their appliances in there, and we don't need any of that because we've got the all-terrain caravan, the off-grid caravan. Like it's able to take us to lots of places where it might not be as easy to go if you didn't have this type of caravan, like the off-grid caravan. So that makes a big difference to where you can camp. So like I think depending on your setup, like it could be a lot more expensive if you had to stay at caravan parks all the time because you needed to be plugged into water. Like we've got good water capacity too. We can carry like quite a lot of water. We're really well set up with the caravan we bought. I mean that was intentional, but
that'll play into your accommodation and your upfront costs, right? Will very much depend and play together in terms of how they're going to work together.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
All right. So the next one then was grocery. So we've spent. Yeah, this is your spending department, but $5,275 so far for the last 3 months. So in weekly, that's basically an average of $440 a week.
And sorry,
we budgeted $300, right? As part of it, so a lot more than what we had budgeted.
Yeah.
But I think, like you mentioned in the budget piece that we would touch on now, is we had been to Australia previously. You hear a lot of the media, etc., that food costs are a lot cheaper in Australia. That has not played out to what we have seen.
We think so. Like the $440 a week is probably pretty consistent with what we spend per week in New Zealand on groceries, and that's been about the same. Like we've tried. Like people said, "Oh, shop at Aldi. Aldi's way cheaper." We have Aldi is definitely cheaper for some things, I think, but we, a lot of the places we're going to, there is no Aldi. So we're in smaller towns. You don't have an Aldi. You have a Woolworths, and in some cases, there's not even a Woolworths. It's a IGA. Or a small local grocer. So, while we do try and do a big shop when we're in a bigger town and stock up on, particularly the more expensive things or like dry things that you can put in that, like pasta and crackers and things that you can, hold. If you stop in to buy fruit, particularly fruit and vegetables, if you have to get top up fruit and vegetables in a small town, which sometimes you just have to, or milk and bread, like it gets way more expensive in the smaller towns. So that's a factor as well. So maybe if we were just living in a big city where there's an Aldi and you could do all your groceries there, maybe your weekly costs might be cheaper.
Yeah, come down.
But it hasn't proven to be as cheap as what we were expecting. So,
and I think our boys are eating a lot more than what they were eating 12 months ago when we actually got this budget together, right? Well, so I think that plays a little part into it. As well, and they're a lot more active, I think, as well, which obviously adds to the food consumption like them at the moment. So, so I mean, 3 months so far, averaging $440 a week for groceries. I think there's still some work that we can probably do to bring some of that down a bit, but it definitely won't be close to 300. So I think that is one of the pieces where the cost is a lot higher than what we budgeted.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think we'll bring that down very much. I mean, doing the grocery shopping, I don't really think. I think that just is what it is. It's an expense that's higher than what we thought, but I don't think there's much you can do about it because
you have to eat.
Yeah.
No, agree. All right. Next one was alcohol. So we spent $671 so far for 3 months on alcohol. So
how does that go against our budget?
Yeah, so our budget, I think, what did we plan for alcohol? I think we planned, was it
$80 a week? It was.
$50 a week was
$50.
Weekly alcohol. So it's at 600 is what we
should have spent.
Yeah, should have spent. So we're a little bit over with the alcohol so far.
Only $71 over. That's pretty good.
Not too bad so far.
I think we should say too, like with the alcohol, like that's like it's one we sort of thought, oh well, we won't drink as much because life won't be as stressful on the road.
Yeah.
Homeschooling.
Homeschooling.
But
24/7 with kids, and then just being, I think, day to day somewhere different.
Yeah, it feels more like a holiday vibe. So you kind of feel like you're sitting there having a barbecue. You kind of feel like a glass of wine, or So I don't know. It's just again. That's one of those ones. It is what it is. I mean, I think that's $71 over. It's not too bad.
But I think the thing that I've noticed definitely is at home compared to Australia is the beer here is very expensive. Compared to home.
But wine's about the same.
But wine's about the same, and spirits probably are generally not that different either. So maybe I just need to change my choices. All right, takeaways. So, I mean, as we know, we're not huge takeaway people anyway. So that has been $1,083 so far for 3 months. So that is tracking quite good. We planned $80 a week for that on average. So about $350 a month. So should have been about the what's that?
About right.
About 1,050 or so. So we're on budget.
But just with the takeaways too, the takeaways includes our eating out as well. Like if we get coffee, if we go out for coffee, if we go out for lunch, or we get pies at a bakery or something like that.
Yeah, it's all
that's all included in the takeaway. So like we went out
Correct.
for dinner the other night. That's included in our takeaways. So, but as a general rule, like we haven't really we were horrified at the cost of fish and chips in Australia.
Oh, yeah.
Like we went out to get fish and chips. Like in New Zealand, fish and chips is a pretty cheap meal, and you can probably get a pretty good fish and chips for all four of us for about $40, right?
Yeah.
And so it's at least $80, if not
$80 to $100
for fish and chips. And so we were like, whoa, we're not paying that much for fish and chips. We'll catch fish.
Yeah.
That's another story. But yeah, it's I mean, I think it's alright. I mean, again, it's quite hard. Like when you're traveling around, again, feeling like you're on holiday, like you kind of have to be a little bit restrictive on I'd really like a coffee, and you feel like going, like you see everybody sitting in restaurants who are actually on like a holiday, but like That's
especially
7 days
their
versus
summer holidays, right? This is the
Yeah.
time where they have
Yeah.
their big break in the year, and actually
Yeah.
we can't just go and spend like we normally probably would
Yeah, I think
on the
that's
Christmas holidays.
the
So
kids
that's
find that
probably
a bit hard
been
as
quite
well.
hard.
Yeah, like wanting to to start out with, we probably had way too many ice creams because it
Yeah.
feels like a holiday, and you kind of think, oh, we'll go to this ice cream place and that ice cream place, but you can't spend the same as you do
No.
like on a regular holiday. You just have to,
Yeah.
get a
Bring it
tub of
in.
ice cream in the caravan.
Yeah. So that's takeaways. Fuel then. So I think the big piece for fuel, like you mentioned, is it's a large timing piece, right? So down the East Coast, we went down the East Coast fairly quickly.
Yeah.
In comparison, not really a huge number of Ks, but lots of short stops as part of it. And availability of fuel was pretty good, so
Yeah.
the price of fuel
Pretty
was actually
reasonable.
quite cheap down the East Coast. So for fuel then, for the 3 months, we spent $3,268. Now, budget-wise, I think that's obviously going to increase as we start going west and start travelling more distance in a shorter space of time.
And what were we expecting for the 3-month period? So over the whole
About $6,000.
Right, so we're well
about
under
half
on
of
fuel.
Correct.
For that sector anyway of the trip, that
Yeah,
section
correct.
of the trip.
And also there's no remote, so the surcharge on
Yeah.
it, etc. Right. So
yeah,
I think the last calculation I did, we were averaging about $1.81 a litre for fuel. I had been around an average of about $2.38. So
was what you budgeted.
was budgeted. So
Yeah,
there's a large
yeah.
swing there just because
Yeah.
of the remoteness
Yeah.
of fuel.
And
So
you'll see, like, as we start to share the month by month ones, some of those you'll see some of the more remote areas coming through. Like when we crossed the Nullarbor, there were some pretty expensive fuel
the
stops
fuel's very expensive.
there, and I think that's probably not even the worst of it. There's probably other ones that are similar at least anyway
correct.
in cost. So we'll get to that in another video.
Cool. So fuel. Personal spending then. So $1,634 so far. So personal spending's been
Under
quite
budget.
down.
Yeah.
I think part of that, as well as we bought a lot of the stuff from New Zealand with us, clothes, etc. Haven't got to the point where they've worn out. The boys haven't outgrown anything yet. So I think there's a lot of that cost that will still got to kind of pay through. So that's going pretty well. Attractions then, we've spent $1,600, about $500 more than what we would have expected on average for that. I think, like you mentioned, coming down the East Coast, lots of cities, high attraction, lots and lots of tourists, so the attractions are, I think, pretty expensive really, compared to what we probably would have seen. But I think as we start going more remote, start national parks, beaches, etc., I'd expect that attractions piece to drop down.
Like when we go to Ningaloo, for example, we're there for a whole month, and there'll be very few attractions we'll be paying for.
Correct.
Because we're just going to be snorkeling and swimming and spending time at the beach. So
correct.
But yeah, I mean, I think the other thing too is that, like, part of it is the experience as well, right? Like sometimes you go to places and there's things that you didn't plan on doing and they're a bit more expensive, or like you just think, oh wow, that's really cool, that'd be a really good experience for us, a really good experience for the kids, and so
you're there.
You're there, you're doing this is I mean, it's not a once in a lifetime, but it's a pretty massive, like some of these places we probably won't go back to in our lifetime. So you're there, you're like, well,
might as well do it.
You might as well do it. So you kind of can't just you can't always scrimp and save.
No, I agree. So, education-wise, like I said, we bought a whole lot from New Zealand, so we spent $72 so far in education. So that's well below budget so far on that. Medical, $80. We've been pretty fortunate. Not a lot has gone wrong. A couple of pharmacy stops, I think, are what's sitting there for a few bits and pieces. Utilities then, $668 for that. I guess part of the large utilities cost, that's more than what we had budgeted at this point. But as part of that, some of the piece was I bought an annual phone plan. So that was a large upfront cost, but obviously will pay off as we go through. But yeah, kind of tracking probably in line with our expectations for the ongoing costs for the utilities.
For that one there, I know we've been umming and ahhing about whether to get Starlink So did you, in your utilities budget for the overall thing, did you include Starlink?
Only for 6 months of the year.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, I guess that's averaged out, so it's effectively half the amount every single month.
Yeah. So we haven't signed up for that.
We haven't signed
yet.
up for Starlink.
I mean, the phone coverage and internet, phone Wi-Fi, etc., has been pretty good coming down the East Coast.
Yeah.
Although that is...
It's getting pretty patchy now.
Yeah, getting harder now. So we probably are going to have to fork out for the Starlink pretty soon, and we'll cover that later on when we do. But
yeah, so the cost of the Starlink itself was in the setup cost when we actually bought that. So that's covered. It's just then the monthly bill, and that's actually gone up compared to what we planned.
But we'll cover that when we announce one of our later breakdowns.
The other piece in utilities that we probably didn't plan for was the laundry piece. I think we planned to use the washing machine in the caravan. As you stay more off-grid, you have to conserve water, so you don't actually have the ability to use that. You end up using laundromats and things like that. So that's a cost that has come into utilities that we didn't, that I didn't actually.
Yeah, we just didn't really think about that, and it does add up really quickly. Like it's normally about $5 for a washing machine load, and the same roughly for a dryer, but it can be more than that depending on the availability and where you are. So pretty quickly, like if you build up a few loads of laundry, you can spend like $30 on catching up on your laundry if you have to go to a laundromat or use a caravan park. You know, laundry. I mean, when we're at a caravan park, if we're on a powered site, we can plug in and then we just like go wash all the clothes. But just something else to factor in. I mean, it's not a huge amount, but I mean, if you had to do it all, you could probably spend $20-$30 a week on laundry.
So then contingency, $613 in contingency there so far. Little bits and bobs. I think actually initially I put laundry actually under the contingency stuff.
Right.
I've now moved it into the utility piece just so we know where that's going. Vehicle servicing. So we spent $1,277 on that. That is a bit more than what we planned so far. And primarily because obviously before we hit the road, I did a service on everything in the car. So large cost to basically make sure everything is known, that we don't have any issues, and if we did, we were at a city where we could fix anything before we need to hit the road. So that sits in there, so that should come out as we go through, because the rest of the services should be a bit cheaper. Caravan servicing then, $549 so far. That was just the initial service that you've got to do basically after you've done the first 1,000 kilometres, I think it is. So that was done, and the next one then is in February, which will be kind of in the 5th month, which will be when that next service cost comes through, and that's at 10,000 k's. So it'll be pretty good. Repairs and breakdown. The first 3 months was nothing in the repairs and breakdown as part of that, so that's good to go so far. And so in total then, first 3 months, we've spent $38,809 in total.
It sounds like a lot.
It sounds like a lot, especially if you then say, that 3 months is going to basically multiply out for the 12, which it's not, by the way. But if you did, then you would go, that way exceeds that 112k that I said.
But that's because that includes that initial setup, right?
Correct.
So if you took that off.
So once those one-off costs are excluded as part of it, I estimate we're about $1,700 a week is what we should spend on the ongoing costs going forward. So
right, so that's what we budgeted was about $1,500, wasn't it? A week. So we're currently sitting about $200 over.
Correct.
Per week at the 3 month mark.
Correct. Yeah,
but,
and that's
pretty good.
That's largely fuel, attractions, and some accommodation so far. So.
All right.
So that's where we're at for 3 months. Not too bad, but I think probably the biggest insight from me into this is the huge outlay. So you need to make sure that you have, I guess, a lot of available funds up front to pay for these things, and then things get cheaper, I guess. Well, hopefully they get cheaper as you go out for the 12 months. Because you've kind of all set up, and a lot of 12-month bills are paid, etc. So that's probably the big piece, is the timing.
And like we said, like we this is 3 months in, what the costs are. I mean, it's changing constantly, and we'll do another update. Like, we'll do a month-to-month update from here on out, I think, on Instagram. So
Yep.
we won't do an in-depth video like this every month, but we'll probably do another one maybe at the 6-month point, and maybe another one at the end when we get home, get back to New Zealand, and we can crunch the numbers there, so that
see
you
how
can
it
sort of see what it looks like after a whole year
Yeah.
on the road overall. And like, particularly like as a family coming from outside of Australia, because it's, I mean, I guess most families would probably have similar costs travelling around Australia, but like, you know, there's initial setup costs, a lot of that you might be able to save if you were
Everybody's
you know,
different,
already
right? Eating habits are
Australia.
different. What you
Yeah.
want to take out, what attractions you want to go to, how often
Yeah.
you want to spend on takeaways, how fast you want to travel the country.
Yeah.
All of those play in, and they're all variables.
Yeah.
So
And the attractions you do as well, because some of the attractions are hugely
Yeah.
expensive. Like, we were looking at, you know, there's you just have to take your pick, I think. I mean, if you have a budget that you need to sort of stick fairly close to, you, and then like, you could do, we were looking at a sea lion swim the other day, and that's like $600 for 4 people to do, you know. And so your costs would be significantly bigger if you chose more of those kinds of attractions. So
yeah, I think people should budget, right? I think they should
Yeah.
put a figure, even if
Yeah.
it's a starting point, because you could very quickly run out of money.
Yeah.
There's lots to see, lots of nice things to go and do, and so
Yeah.
unless you're in a fortunate position where you have an endless supply of money. So
that'd be nice.
that'd be nice.
Oh, well, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in and listening. Like, we'd be more than happy to answer any questions as well.
Sure.
So I think if you have any questions, you can either drop them on this video or send us a private message or leave a comment on Instagram. We might put up a post on Instagram as well, just generally asking about questions, because there's probably just, at this point, we can probably answer a few more general questions about travelling or moving countries or things like that might be helpful for people who are doing the same sort of thing. So
And maybe we've missed some pieces that people are interested in.
yeah, absolutely. So we can record another episode like this, covering off any particular questions anyone's interested in. So just let us know what would be helpful. You know, if you're planning a trip, because I know there's so much to take in. Like, when we were planning, and a lot of it you just don't really realize until you start doing it.
Agree.
So yeah. Thanks for listening to this week's episode, or this bonus episode, should I say. And we will, of course, be back with our regular Friday episode each week, where we're just sharing our travels. Hope you have a great week, and we will talk to you again soon. Bye for now.